Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Welcome back to episode 60 of the Near Memo with David, Mike, and Greg. And we're talking, as always, about search, social, and commerce with local flavor, local inflection. I was out next week, and Joy Hawkins sat in for me, last week, rather. And sorry, Freudian slip. But I was in Joshua Tree with a friend. It was beautiful down there, and in California, for those that don't know where that is. And we're back this week, full strength. We'll be talking about Google, I think, across the board. And I want to acknowledge that tonight is the first. Well, so it's Friday, April 15th when we're recording this. So tonight is the first night of Passover. I believe Ramadan also has begun, and Easter, of course, is on Sunday. So it's a very unusual convergence of these three holidays. So happy holidays to everybody out there. Just wanted to acknowledge that. And let's then jump right in after that long preamble to this week's stories. And I wanted to talk about the IAB report, the 2021 full year advertising report, which I thought was very interesting. It was really a kind of a huge year for digital advertising. 35% growth, the highest growth since 2006. The total number was something like 190, very close to 190 billion. And, making digital advertising the largest medium by far, really, now in the United States in terms of advertising revenue. And one of the things that was quite striking about it was the strength of search, right? I mean, there's been this sort of perception that over time search would not maintain its momentum, would not be able to maintain its growth. And it's 41% of digital advertising revenue across desktop and mobile. The next highest category was display at 30%. The highest growth categories were digital audio and video on a percentage basis, but those are much smaller numbers. But it's really remarkable how search has continued to maintain its dominance of digital advertising, and really, in some sense, increased it last year. And that's almost entirely Google revenue, right? I mean, the actual number, the actual search revenue number was 78.3 billion, and display was 56.7 billion. So really 22 billion more. In real dollar terms, the increase of over 2020 was $50 billion. So there was $50 billion in increased digital ad revenue, which is a huge number. Almost a shocking number over 2020. And another thing that's worth calling out here is that about 80% of that revenue is concentrated in 10 companies. That's sort of been true for years, but it really just, it's kind of a remarkable thing, because in real dollar terms, that's about the $50 billion increase. About 40 billion of that was pocketed by those 10 companies. So massive concentration of revenue, and in particular in the search category. There's no other digital advertising category that is so dominated by a single company as search. And also worth mentioning, about 72% of revenue was mobile, and 28% or 29% was desktop. So there's now, I haven't looked at these numbers in a couple of years, but that's another really striking number. From my point of view. I have other things to say, but Mike, it sounds like you want to make a comment.
Well, a couple of things. One is this a function? I mean, is this a zero-sum game? I mean, has this come from someplace else? Or as you saw in the census reports today or yesterday, we've seen huge jumps in retail and restaurant employment across the United States. We've seen huge jumps in new business starts for the last, period, year, whatever. So is this a subtraction from other advertising medium, or is it new, or both?
Well, both, I think, is the answer. Some of it is net new, as you imply with your comments. And if you look at the IAB report is basically compiled by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they at the end of the report they have a comparative chart reflecting different media channels: internet, TV, magazines, newspaper, and so on. And interestingly, many of the traditional media channels actually grew last year. Newspapers were up, 3.5%. Radio was up almost 13%, which is kind of amazing. Magazines were off, and a couple other channels were off, and out of home was also up. So there's some net new dollars in there, but also other traditional media have been bleeding for a long time, and the internet has siphoned some of that away. So I would say it's a mix of things going on there. I spoke at a investor conference this week for Evercore, and we were talking. I was on a panel with a couple of other people in the industry, and we were talking about the sustainability of Google's position in search and its revenue growth. And one of the things that really plays into Google's hands is all the privacy stuff that's going on, because search is really uniquely positioned versus display advertising and other types of advertising to benefit from tighter privacy rules, because there are almost no privacy implications to straight up search advertising. So, I mean, it's amazing that Google, such a huge company, $2 trillion market cap, now, is really essentially a monopoly in paid search, and is generating by itself almost 40% of digital ad revenue.
Yeah, I was going to say that the growth doesn't surprise me necessarily. I developed a graphic probably 5 years ago at this point, where my hypothesis was that even if search didn't grow as a thing, that Google would just monetize more and more and more of each SERP. And I think we've seen that play out with all of the Google, especially the Google Shopping advances in the COVID era. I see more and more shopping carousels. We've talked about the inventory situation before. So I think that's also a contributing factor, is just there are more ads than there used to be, and the ads that are there are probably getting more expensive, although I'm not involved in enough AdWords, or I guess just ads accounts to know if that's the case.
That's the anecdotal evidence for sure, that certain things are much more competitive and per click. I mean, we could do that analysis of Google's earnings, but that's my sense. But what the increased monetization of the SERP, the new ad units, the pages that have nothing but ads above the fold on mobile devices, this is a source of enormous criticism now from people in the industry about Google. That they're just putting too many ads, too much ad clutter in the results, and there's a perception that search results are getting worse even as the technology and the back end becomes more sophisticated. So it's kind of crazy that the market is so demanding that Google has to continue to squeeze more and more revenue out of the SERP when it is so dominant. Otherwise, it just seems really unfortunate, because they're just making money hand over fist, and yet investors want more and more and more growth, and some of that is propelling Google to do all this monetization. Okay, all right.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.